Yo, what up, peeps? We're back with another video. This video actually took me a while. Probably took me, like 3 weeks to make it work. This video is going to be my top 30, as you see here, greatest mixed martial artists of all time. I probably switched this list around dozens of times. Getting it looked at by a couple people I trust, and then immediately changing things around. Not too much at the behest of other people, but there's a couple spots where it was really, really tough to figure out where I wanted to place guys based off how I view the sport. We've said on the podcast a bunch of different times that greatness is an amalgamation of things. It's not just one thing or a handful of things. It's a lot of different things. I noticed when I've seen some videos from other, content creators that talk about, fighting sports and MMA, I really think they're very linear in hang on a few different things, instead of looking at what a fighter means at specific times to the sport as a whole. That being said, there's a lot of fighters on this list. As you'll see, there's actually more than 30 in the list because, it's my list. I can do whatever I want to. I tied a few people at 30 because there was just some people I felt like I needed to make slides for. So I tried my hardest to make a holistic approach to, greatness. When push comes to shove, when we get to the tail end, there are a handful of things that I factor just a little bit more. Who you beat, longevity, how you beat guys, things of that nature. One thing I'm not going to do is I think that if you encompass some of the things that could truly hold people back in terms of taints on people's legacies, I'm not going to get into steroid stuff and things of that nature. Because it could, if you go that route, you could make the argument it alters the list a little bit. I'm going strictly off what these dudes have done, men and women have done, and what they're capable of doing. Going to analyze the actual arc of their careers a tad. It's hard doing this many fighters. I'm sure there's going to be little spots that kind of conflict with things that I say at different times, and I even caught myself doing that. But I tried my best. And I'll try my best to thoroughly explain it. This is going to be a decently long video, so hopefully I can do it in a decent amount of time for you guys. So without further ado, my 30 greatest or so mixed martial artists of all time. So I got some honorable mentions. I'm not going to go through these honorable mentions because there's a lot here. You can look at these at your own leisure. Some of these guys, Uriah Faber, Eddie Alvarez, a few other guys, you can make the argument should probably be in the top 30. I don't disagree with you. Like I said, but this is my list. And this is where all my honorable mentions are, and you guys can look that over. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. So starting off, tied at 30, Dustin the Diamond Poirier, record 30-9. The guy was a finisher, beat a lot of great fighters. He actually has wins over champions and stuff. Max Holloway, Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler, Eddie Alvarez, guys like that. Anthony Pettis was a former champion. Just a laundry list of elite dudes and high-level guys he beat. Even some of his lower-level wins are good wins. He just beat Benoit St. Denis. He has a win over Dan Hooker, who's really tough. Notable losses, Khabib and Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor. He was the interim champion, and he has a litany of accolades, most bonuses, tied most fight of the night. He's got the most wins in UFC history, which is something. He's a complete fighter, and he's still one of the best fighters in the world today at, I want to say, 33, 34 years old. He had all-time great fights, all-time great wins, and in my opinion, he's the greatest non-title winning champion. He was an interim champ, didn't go through with actually winning the belt. What holds him back from being higher on the list? He's 0-3 in title fights. As I wrote, 155 pounds is an eternal Shark Tank. It's hard to stay on top of this division. As you see, the most wins, the most consecutive title wins for a champion is 3. And you'll see that regurgitated throughout this list with other guys that have held this belt. So One of my favorite fighters of all time, Dustin Poirier. I feel like he's the greatest non-title winning champion, so he's tied 30th on this list. Also tied 30th on this list, Francis the Predator Ngannou, 17-3 record. He's beaten guys like Stipe, Cain, Junior Dos Santos, Overeem, Curtis Blades. In his notable losses, Stipe and Derek Lewis. He won the heavyweight title, defended it one time. He's tied for the second most KOs in heavyweight history. He could make the argument he's the only true one-punch knockout artist. We've seen a few guys hit some guys in one-punch KO. I'm like, Conor's got like a one-punch KO. Johnny Hendricks, if you remember, knocked a couple people dead with one punch. But, Ngannou's going out there and just turning dudes into Pez dispensers and knocking their heads into the front row. What holds him back? Lack of longevity. Really had a bunch of fights really quick in the UFC. He's an older guy. And then, with the contract dispute and everything, he left the UFC. So that really holds him back from being higher on the list. He ran through a bunch of good fighters, had his ups and downs himself, dropped some fights here and there. But, just a raw fighter with just insane physical attributes and just knocking people dead. So Francis Ngannou, tied 30th. Also tied 30th, and this one might be one of the ones that's a take. I could see how people don't even think she should be on the list. I could see how some people might think she could be higher on the list. But Ronda Rousey's an important fighter in terms of the history of MMA, and I do believe, all things considered, she should be considered a great fighter. Her record is 12-2. She beat Kat Zingano, Miesha Tate twice, Sarah McMahon. Notable losses, Holly Holm and Amanda Nunes. We'll get to that later. She was the inaugural UFC women's bantamweight champion with 6 title defenses. That's important. She was the Strikeforce bantamweight champion with a title defense before the UFC, took Strikeforce and their roster on. She finished everyone she fought, which is pretty wild. Fastest KO in women's history, 16 seconds. Fastest submission UFC title fight history against Kat Zingano, 14 seconds. She's a Hall of Famer. She's a pioneer of women's MMA, first ever female champion in the UFC history, and she had a dominant title run. What holds her back, and some people would say you can't hold this against certain fighters, the area and the time that they're in, but she's more of a modern fighter. Is her level of competition and notable wins, at the time, yeah, it's not her fault the division wasn't as staunch as it is now, and the women fighters are a lot better now. But that was really reflected in her 2 losses when she fought, 2 girls that can handle the physicality that she brought, and were just overtly just more skilled than her. So that's why she's lower on the list. But I felt like, she's definitely top 30 all time. Like what she's meant to the sport. She was a draw, all these other things. And broke through for women's MMA. So Ronda Rousey tied at 30th. Number 21. This is another controversial one because I know a lot of people don't like Tyron Woodley, and that's a whole nother thing. And there's a lot of reasons why. I see both sides of it. I think there's a lot of reasons, like, you could not like Tyron Woodley, but in terms of his, performances and stuff like that, he has to be on this list. He has a lot of good notable wins. He beat Robbie Lawler, Wonderboy, Carlos Condit, Calvin Castle. All these wins are really good wins. Notable losses, Kamaru Usman, Covington, Jake Shields, Rory McDonald, but, his accomplishments, UFC welterweight champion, and he defended the title 4 times. Against good fighters. 4th greatest UFC welterweight of all time. Notable wins. What holds him back? It's just 3 greater welterweight champions than him with greater longevity. He does not have the longevity and the consistency, the duration that he held the title as the other welterweights ahead of him. Tricky career, with all the stuff, the media, the banter with him and other fighters, him in the UFC. Not totally as consistent as some of the other champions throughout his career. Had some snoozer fights, but Tyron Woodley, based off his accomplishments, the guys he's beaten, he deserves to be on this list. Number 28, BJ Penn. So some people put BJ really, really high on their list. I love BJ, but there's a couple important fighters on this list where I don't rate them as high or as low as some other people. BJ tends to be one of those guys. His record is 16-14-2. You know, he has wins. He has a couple great wins over Matt Hughes twice. He beat Jens Pulver for his time. Jens Pulver was one of the best dudes at 155 in the world. Beat Gomi, Sean Shirk, Sanchez when Sanchez was in his prime, steamrolling people. And people thought Diego Sanchez was going to be like the next future champion. And when BJ decided to work hard, he just outclassed Diego Sanchez. Kenny Florian, Matt Serra. One of the things that holds him back is his notable losses. He had a lot of losses, as you can see on his record, towards the tail end of his career. But some of his achievements, light heavyweight champion 1 time, defended it 3 times, most title bouts in lightweight history with 8, most finishes in lightweight title bouts with 4. He was also the UFC welterweight champion. He's a Hall of Famer for the modern wing. Some positives about BJ Penn that make it so he makes this list. He had an all-time skill set, in my opinion. His ability to box and more so mix in kicks. He kind of progressed a little bit as a striker, in my opinion, towards like his prime, mixing in kickboxing well, leg kicks, his aggression and his influence on the sport. And he was a finisher. You know, 2-time double champ and pioneer of lightweight MMA. What holds him back? Losses down the stretch, like I said. Ebbs and flows of focus and motivation. A guy who, in his day, would get you so hyped for a fight. You know, that Hawaiian, like, why and I, like, all that, like, wherever the hell, you know, him and the Hawaiian guys tend to have this, like, thing where, you know, they're just about that fucking destruction. And, you know, BJ Penn really made you feel like he was just going to murder someone when he came in the cage. Like, just so comfortable at being violent in there. But he had a ebb and flow of focus and motivation at times. It's like, you know, you never knew what BJ you were going to get. It was either he was on and he was murdering someone, or he just didn't show up at times, in my opinion, and was never focused throughout his whole entire career. So BJ Penn, number 28. Number 27, a guy who fought BJ Penn a lot, Frankie the Answer Edgar. 24-11. He had a bunch of notable wins. He beat Charles Oliveira, these are his big wins. Charles Oliveira, BJ Penn 3 times. I also think Yair Rodriguez is a huge win for him. Chad Mendez, Gray Maynard, beat Uriah Faber, Cub Swanson 2 times, and Jim Miller. Notable losses. He only lost to, like, you know, good guys in his prime. Was the UFC lightweight champion, defended that 3 times, 8-time Fight of the Night winner, second most octagon time, which is nuts, with almost 8 hours. UFC Hall of Famer, the modern wing. Positives, one of the first new wave of complete MMA fighters. Frankie was just, in my opinion, a complete fighter, could kickbox, really good at angles, corralling dudes and dropping dudes with like pretty heavy shots for a dude that was undersized. Could take dudes down, beat them up. There just wasn't any positions where he wasn't really good. Even when he got put on his back, he was good at scrambling to his feet. Just a really good fucking fighter, man. Only lost to elite fighters in his prime, like I said. And then I just, as a joke, I wrote "Do It for Tom's River" because, you know, attaboy Frankie and all that stuff. I used to love watching Frankie Edgar fight. What holds him back? Started to struggle as athletes got bigger and stronger as he started to progress through his prime. You know, he eventually went down to 135 pounds from 55, incrementally losing the weight. And by today's standards, he is a 135-pounder. And I think that's something that people don't talk about enough. Being an athlete still matters. You know, if you have all the skills, the height, weight, the speed, the reaction time, you know, the awareness, the perception, you know, the anticipation, seeing things coming, setting things up, it really helps you hone actual skills. It makes it easier for you to implement those skills on people, you know. So I think it's a little bit why Frankie at times suffered in his career, you know, being like just the smaller guy. Sounds stupid, but that's just my opinion. Number 26, Randy the Natural Couture, record 30-11. Notable wins: Chuck Liddell, Vitor Belfort 2 times, Tito Ortiz. It has a laundry list of good wins here. Beat a lot of dudes across like 2 generations. Lost to Chuck twice, lost to Vitor, lost to Lyoto when Lyoto kicked his dentures out of his head. That shit was wild. Accomplishments: UFC heavyweight champion 3 times, 3 total title defenses. UFC light heavyweight champion 2 times. UFC 13 heavyweight tournament champion. UFC Hall of Famer, the Pioneer Wing. The dude fought forever. He fought tons of dudes. He's a 5-time champion at between lightweight and heavyweight, and he's an MMA pioneer. Like, you know, you can't tell the story of MMA without talking about Randy Couture. fun fighter to watch, I thought. Like, obviously had good wrestling and stuff, but really good boxing in the clinch, getting dudes up against the fence and beating them up. Really had really good defense and had this ability to corral dudes and get them on the fence and just punish them. It was just, I always thought Randy Couture was a fun guy to watch, and he did it until he was really old. What holds him back is mostly no consistency or dominance as an actual champion. I mean, he won a belt 5 times, could never really hold on to it, and then a lot of that has to do too with contract disputes and stuff, you know. But obviously he lost those titles, but Randy was in and out of the UFC and stuff, so yeah, I think it's a good spot for Randy Couture. Number 25, Chuck the Iceman Liddell, fan favorite. 21-9 notable wins. Randy Couture 2 times, Vitor Belfort, Tito Ortiz 2 times, Renato Sobral, Alistair Overeem, Guy Mezger. He beat a bunch of good dudes. Beat some underrated dudes too, like Guy Mezger and Jeremy Horn. Lost to Randy Couture. He lost to Rampage twice. Rashad Evans. The Rashad Evans knockout was brutal, and that was kind of like the beginning of the end of Chuck's decline. Accomplishments: UFC light heavyweight champion 1 time, defended that title 4 times. Most KOs in UFC light heavyweight history with 10. Longest KO win streak of all time was 7. I think that's pretty impressive. Second most title wins in UFC light heavyweight history with 5. UFC Hall of Famer. He's an all-time knockout artist in terms of not only like the amount of knockouts he got, when he got them, but also the fashion, in which he got them. Chuck was a fucking berserker, bro. I believe that when Chuck fought to the best of his ability, he had a style that was really hard for dudes to deal with. Really good takedown defense, really good scrambles, knew how to use angles to cut dudes off, throwing punches at like odd angles, and just would come forward, could take a punch in his prime. It was just a nonstop cascade of he was just a striking machine. What holds him back is Miles and Chin caught up to him towards the end of his prime, which eventually ended his prime. He couldn't really take punches anymore, and he was one of those great fighters where he truly, all of a sudden, something happened and he could not take shots. And then he took too many fights after the fact. And, and for a dude that was as dominant as he was, he just doesn't have the title reign as some of the other dudes in the heavier weight classes have. I know he defended the title 4 times, but he kind of just fell off a cliff. So, Chuck Liddell, 25. Probably low for a lot of people, but it's my list. So this one's going to be controversial for people. Number 24, Alex Poatan Pereira. 10 wins and 2 losses. Notable wins: Israel Adesanya, Jan Blachowicz, Yuri Prohaska, Sean Strickland, and Jamal Hill. Notable losses: Israel Adesanya. Accomplishments: UFC light heavyweight champion 1 time defended. UFC middleweight champion 1 time. First and only fighter to ever win the middleweight and the light heavyweight titles. So this is where it gets interesting, Alex Pereira, and this is why he's on my list. He's on my list because of the potential and what he's done in a short period of time. Shortest time and fewest bouts to win 2 titles in 736 days, and with 7 bouts total. Holds wins over 5 former champions, which I don't know if anyone's done that so quickly. There's a lot of other guys that have wins over that many champions, like above him, but how quick he's done it. And I know light heavyweight, since John's left, has kind of been like a little revolving door. But the fastest rise to 2 titles, potential to be the GOAT watch. And the reason why I say this is because, is it possible? He's talked about going up to heavyweight. The dude's fucking massive. He has changed the game. He's one of the only guys I've ever seen who comes in there truly with his only skill being his kickboxing. But he's so big, so long, so fast, understands distance, hits like a fucking truck. Good enough takedown defense, and good enough at understanding how to keep dudes away from him with his footwork and setting up shots. Guys are scared to shoot in on Alex Pereira. I know Yuri Prohaska took him down and held him down for a little bit in their first fight, but it wasn't enough. I expect him to go out here and knock Prohaska out again in a couple weeks here. He's talked about going up to heavyweight. Heavyweight has shown that if you can stop dudes from taking you down and knock dudes out, you can make a run at heavyweight. Is it inconceivable that he doesn't knock a bunch of dudes out of heavyweight too? I absolutely don't think so. He hits as hard as all of them. So he could possibly be the first ever 3-division champ. I wrote that it's a long shot, but what he has done in the UFC to me is nothing short of impressive, and it's like an all-time short run. What holds him back is obviously lack of longevity, but I really believe that's subject to change. Until someone can go out there, consistently take this dude down and beat him up, he's going to keep knocking everyone out. Now, I will say one caveat to that. He's kickboxed his whole life. That's his bread and butter. He can be knocked out himself. You know, he's gotten some fights where he's gotten hurt himself and stuff like that, but, you know, things swing the right way for him. He could vault himself further up this list. But as of right now, 2-weight champ, knocked out 5 champs. No one wants to fucking fight the dude. Alex Pereira, number 24. Henry Cejudo, record 16-4. Notable wins: Demetrius Johnson, Dominick Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, Marlon Moraes. He's got a bunch of good wins on underrated guys, too. Sergio Pettis, I actually messed that up there. He's got a win over Wilson Hayes. And Jesse Formiga, who at one point was one of the best 125-pounders in the world for all the hardcore MMA fans out there. Lost to Demetrius Johnson, Rob Aljo, and Joseph Benavidez. Accomplishments: he's a UFC bantamweight champion. He's got 1 title defense there. UFC featherweight champion. He's got 1 title defense there. 7th 2-time division champ. What holds him back? Retiring in his prime. And he was also late to the game. I know he came back and fought a couple times, but, you know, there's a few guys on this list who I'm going to ding because they dropped the ball and should have, you know, people could do whatever they want to do. I'm not a professional fighter. But there's a handful of guys that just decided to retire and like to talk about their legacy and stuff like that and this and that and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, meanwhile, there's other champions that have just steamrolled competition forever. And it's like, it's hard for me to put you in the same light. I know he's got 2 championships and he's defended both of them one time, but then he just retired, you know? So I can't put you higher on the list when you chose, you know, to retire in your prime. So Henry Cejudo, 23. Now I have Conor McGregor at 22. Some people would put him higher on this list because, you know, they're a nut hugger. Some people would say he doesn't deserve to be on this list. I fall somewhere in the middle because I can actually, like, you know, see both sides of an argument, you know, and make an objective, you know, critique. So you'd probably ask yourself, why is he higher than Henry Cejudo? Because he's never defended his titles. Well, we'll get into it. Notable wins: Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, Dustin Poirier, Eddie Alvarez, Chad Mendes, Nate Diaz, and Donald Cerrone. I think those wins are as good, maybe a little bit better. The top 4 dudes he's beaten are a lot better than the top 4 dudes, in my opinion, that Cejudo has beaten. Good record, lost to Khabib, Dustin Poirier twice, and Nate Diaz. It's not like something to hang your head on. UFC featherweight champion 1 time, UFC lightweight champion 1 time, fastest win and finish in UFC championship history with 13 seconds. 1 of 2 fighters to have KOs across 3 weight divisions. The only other guy that's got that is Jared Cannonier. 3rd multiple division champion. At one point, a dynamic fighting style. 2-weight champion. Highest selling MMA athlete of all time. We're talking about greatness that matters. People fucking want to watch this dude fight. And even now, with everything that's going on, having to pull out of this fight with Chandler, like, there was people that were just, like, selling cars and shit to get tickets. Super marketable. Make no mistake about it, outside of losing a handful of fights, I think there's like this mystique that like Conor McGregor is like a bum and can't fight, and like what holds him back is no title defenses and lack of hunger to truly be great. Let's be real, the money changed him, but at one point that dude was a very dangerous fighter, and still if he was committed, it's a danger to knock most dudes out. Like, the dude was an elite fighter, no matter how much people want to slice it. So with, you know, the titles he's won, with the eyes he's brought to the sport, you know, it made sense to put him on this list. I'm not one of these dudes that thinks Conor McGregor's a top 10 fighter. I just think that's stupid. But I definitely think he deserves to be on this list. So Conor McGregor, number 22. Number 21. So this one's a little controversial because a lot of people think, you know, there's actual UFC title holders behind him. I've seen, you know, like, should he be lower? I'm definitely not one of these dudes that puts Fedor. I seen a video where some dude put Fedor in his top fucking 5. I think that's a little bit nuts. But Fedor means something to the greatness of the sport. So I have Fedor, the last Emperor, Emelianenko, at number 21. An insane record of 40-7. An all-time finisher, 16 KOs and 15 subs. He's got good wins. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira 2 times. Mirko Cro Cop in his prime. I think it's a really good win. Cro Cop was beating the fuck out of everybody. Frank Mir, Andrei Arlovski, Tim Sylvia, Chael Sonnen, Rampage Jackson, Renato Sobral. He's just a laundry list of dudes he's beaten. He also lost more later in his career to really good fighters like Dan Henderson, Fabricio Verdum, Bigfoot Silva, and I think that kind of showed, where his actual ceiling was, because, when you're losing to older fighters, older light heavyweight fighters, and older heavyweight fighters outside the UFC, you kind of see that there's reasons as to probably why he didn't, there's talks about what he wanted contract-wise and stuff to get to the UFC, but that's neither here nor there. He was the Pride Heavyweight Champion with 3 title defenses, the 2004 Pride Heavyweight World Grand Prix Champion, and he's just a pioneer of heavyweight MMA and MMA in general. He was unbeaten in all MMA competition for some insane amount of time. It's almost a decade, 28 bouts, great career moments in MMA, helping define the sport, just a true pioneer, and he's truly a great fighter. What holds him back, never fighting the UFC against elite heavyweights. There were so many missed matchups, left a lot on the table, but he fought a really long time. He's got almost 50 MMA fights, so Fedor Emelianenko, last Emperor, beast. Number 20, Cain Velasquez. This was one that was hard for me because I truly think Cain Velasquez is a great fighter. And there's always a discussion as to where you want to put dudes that, are riddled with injuries. And that's been one of the issues with Cain Velasquez. I don't hold the injuries against people the way I would hold retiring in your prime. I know that, if guys don't want to fight anymore, you should knock them for wanting to fight anymore. But that's you making that decision. It's not the same thing as dudes that are starving and hungry to be great and they're getting hurt. I always often wonder to what times injuries are avoidable, but for the most part, I don't think injuries are avoidable. You're just kind of lucky if you don't get injured as much as, athletes do at times. But notable wins for Cain: Junior Dos Santos 2 times, Antonio Nogueira, which he won the title, Fabricio Verdum, Brock Lesnar, Bigfoot Silva, Ben Rothwell twice, bunch of really good wins. Dominant wins. He only lost to Junior Dos Santos, Francis Ngannou, Fabricio Verdum. And I can make the argument, the Ngannou loss, late in his career, beat up a lot, just a guy that was riddled with injuries. Accomplishments: UFC heavyweight champion, defended it 2 times. He was a complete heavyweight, wrestling, high-level kickboxing, gas tank for days, which was his moniker, finishing ability, and notable wins. What holds him back? Injuries. I really feel like if Cain wasn't injured as much as he was, he could have been a top 10 fighter of all time. I think if Cain was healthy, as healthy as he could have been, and on point as he could have been for longer, there's probably not a dude, in my opinion, that he couldn't beat. I think he would have held his belt longer and defended it more than 2 times. That's just my opinion. I truly think that it was injuries that held him back. You can make the argument he's the best heavyweight ever to fight between him and a few other guys. So Cain Velasquez, number 20. So this one's going to be controversial for a lot of the dudes out there that just hate on women's MMA and don't think it's exciting, but I'm going to grade this stuff. I'm going to try my hardest to grade this stuff right on par with the guys. Women's MMA is a little bit younger, so I think we haven't seen the best yet to come from the women's. It's still a little bit more in its infancy than MMA is general, but there's a lot of guys that think you shouldn't put women on this list. But there's a handful of great female fighters, as you're going to see in my list, and I'm not scared to put them on here. Number 19, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Record 21-5, notable wins. She got a laundry list of elite wins, and if you don't watch MMA, you wouldn't know how good these girls are. Claudia Gadelha 2 times, Jessica Andrade, Carla Esparza, Tisa Torres, Juliana Pena, Michelle Waterson, Karolina Kovacevic, and Valerie Letourneau, who was underrated and beating a lot of chicks at that time. Only lost to elite fighters. Rose Namajunas 2 times, Valentina Shevchenko, Weili Zhang 2 times. Can't knock that. Accomplishments: women's strawweight champion, 5 consecutive title defenses, most title bouts in strawweight history with 9, most title fight wins in strawweight history with 6, UFC Hall of Fame, modern wing, elite wins, dominant champion. That I wrote Boogie Woman because I love how she used to say Boogie. I'm the Boogie Woman. What holds her back? Not as dominant as a few of her contemporary female fighters on this list, which is not a slight against her. There's just two other women that have, just a little bit better, like a little bit better careers than her. But, Joanna Jędrzejczyk was, you could make an argument, was the first, like, dominant women's champion. Like, she was a bad bitch. Just high-level kickboxer if she ever got to UFC. Could stuff takedowns. The pace that she would put on women had, physical speed and attributes and a will to win. And she just would really put it on women with her kickboxing and just, she just dismantled a lot of chicks. Loved watching her fight. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, number 19. This one's probably controversial to a lot of people, and I'll get into why Charles Oliveira is so high on my list. Charles do Bronx Oliveira, record 34-10. Notable wins: Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson, Will Brooks, Beneil Dariush, Kevin Lee, Jim Miller, Jeremy Stevens. Notable losses: Islam, Max Holloway, Amansar Yukin, who's going to be fighting for the title soon. And then I wrote Paul Felder and Anthony Pettis because, as we'll get to down the list, probably should have lost those fights. Accomplishments: UFC lightweight champion. He defended at one time. And this is the meat and potatoes of why, in my opinion, Charles Oliveira is one of the greatest fighters of all time. Most finishes in UFC history with 20. He had a 90% win finish percentage in terms of his wins. Second most wins in lightweight history with 14, which is nuts. Most submissions in UFC history with 16, tied first with the most subs in UFC lightweight history. Jim Miller, because he's, Oliveira fought at multiple divisions. Ultra skilled MMA fighter. In my opinion, this is just my opinion, he's the most skilled MMA fighter of all time in terms of what he could actually do to a human being. He's the most skilled fighter I've ever watched. That's just my opinion. Arguably the greatest finisher of all time. There's a couple other dudes that were as good finishers as him and have a lot of finishes, so you could parse hairs there. What holds him back? Consistency at key times. Drop losses to fighters, in my opinion, that he should have never lost to. There was always talks about his confidence and his focus. He had a couple fights where, there's a lot of fights where he's like beating the brakes off dudes and then he would hit a little adversity and he would kind of fold. And, it sucks saying that. And a lot of guys harp on it and get too serious on it, like almost like, they wouldn't have fucking folded in that position. But, it's tough. But something happened where he managed to get over that hump and went on some like all-time great stoic run and was just finishing everyone on his way to the title. What holds him back is his lack of a title reign, really. He could have been top 10 all time, but like I said with Dustin Poirier, 155 is a Shark Tank. It probably will be forever. Charles do Bronx Oliveira, number 18. Number 17, I've seen people put Izzy in their top 10. He's not in my top 10. 24-3. Notable wins over Alex Pereira, Robert Whittaker 2 times, Joel Romero, Anderson Silva, Calvin Gastelum. Like, these are all really high-level wins. Notable losses, only 3. Alex Pereira, Sean Strickland, and Jan Blachowicz. His accomplishments: UFC middleweight champion 2 different times. Altogether, he defended it 5 times. Most title fight wins in UFC middleweight history with 8. He had a unique striking style, a more snipey kickboxing, kind of like almost like a hybrid of kickboxing and like point karate style, just a very sniper point style kickboxer, using a lot of different feints and footwork and volume, not really looking to land like crazy big shots. And do I find the style like impressive and aesthetically pleasing? Yeah. But at times it made for a lot of what people perceive to be boring fights. And yeah, a few of the fights I thought were boring. I'm not going to lie. He has a lot of notable wins. The downside to that is, what holds him back is too many close fights, some of which I definitely thought he should have lost. You can make the argument that his notable wins, they're elite fighters. There are a lot of really good fighters. But comparative to some of the other champions, a lot of these fights are way closer than people want to admit. And there's a lot of dudes that love Izzy. That's fine. It's cool, whatever. But they're not honest about how he was on the receiving end of some decisions I didn't think he deserved. And he had a lot of tough moments in fights. At the end of the day, he still got all these wins. But compared to other champions, I just don't rate the matches as high, the wins as high. But he's a great fighter. Israel Adesanya, 17. Number 16, Valentina the Bullet Shevchenko. 23 wins, 4 losses. Laundry list of wins for her. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Holly Holm, Penn, Jessica Andrade, Caitlin Chukagian, Jessica Eilis, Kamaru Murphy, Telly Santos. Notable losses. Amanda Nunes 2 times, although I thought she beat her 1 time. So that's why I put 1 split decision, and then she lost to Alexa Grasso. That was an odd fight. You know, sometimes in fighting, you have like a lapse in judgment, or you get a little complacent, and little Alexa Grasso, after losing 4 rounds, takes you back and chokes you out. Sometimes you got to be perfect all the time in these fights. There's no room for, you know, taking your eye off the prize and just, you know, coasting a little bit, which could have been the reason why she dropped that fight. Accomplishments: UFC flyweight champion, 7 consecutive title defenses, most title wins in flyweight history with 8, most consecutive wins in women's flyweight history with 9, most KOs in women's UFC flyweight history with 4, most takedowns, believe it or not, in women's flyweight history with 39. All-time elite and well-rounded skill set. Valentina Shevchenko is one of my favorite fighters of all time. And she, in my opinion, is one of the most well-rounded fighters of all time. Really good off her back, good on top, had a whole wide array of takedowns, whether she was body lock, taking women down via body locks, inside-outside trips, really good clinch, and just like a pinpoint elite kickboxer. Had every tool under the sun, and she was a dominant champion. Most known for her striking, but man, her ability to take all these girls down and beat them up when she needed to, beat them up along the fence, and her pace that she would put on women. She's just great. What holds her back? Amanda Nunes, basically. But I thought she beat her in that split decision verdict. That's neither here nor there, because number 15 is Amanda the Lioness Nunes. 23 wins, 5 losses. Again, another laundry list of women she's beaten: Valentina Shevchenko 2 times, Holly Holm, Cyborg Santos, Irene Aldana, Jermaine Durand 2 times, Ronda Rousey, Juliana Pena, Raquel Pennington, Miesha Tate, Megan Anderson, and Sarah McMahon. Notable losses: Juliana Pena, which, you know, you got to give the win to Pena, but I kind of couldn't fucking believe that happened. And she lost to Kat Zingano early on in her career via decision. Accomplishments: women's UFC bantamweight champion 2 times, defended it a total of 6 times. Women's flyweight champion, defended it 2 times. Most wins in UFC title fights among women in all divisions with 11, and 8 times in women's bantamweight division. Longest combined title reign of all time, almost 4,000 days. Dominant 2-weight champion, first ever 2-weight champion in women's divisions. What holds her back? There isn't much left for her to do. Current women's GOAT. Number 14. So based off a lot of the things I've been saying, people probably wonder why Matt Hughes is this high on the list. I've seen people put Matt Hughes in their top 10. I was tinkering with a formula a little while back where I was doing like a number system. Like, I've seen places that do like ELO ratings, point systems to try to determine who the greatest fighter of all time is. And Matt Hughes is not the greatest fighter of all time, but I've seen him come out like top 5 and number 1 on some of those sites because of how dominant he was throughout his whole entire career. 45-9, which is an insane record. Notable wins: he has a win over GSP, win over BJ Penn, Joe Riggs, Chris Liddell, Frank Trigg, Sean Shirk, Matt Serra, and Carlos Newton 2 times. Notable losses: BJ Penn, GSP 2 times, Thiago Alves, and Josh Koscheck. UFC champion 2 times. First reign, defended it 5 times. Second reign, defended it 2 times. Most title defenses in welterweight history was 7, which is the second most. Second most title fight wins in welterweight history with 12. 6 most title fight wins in welterweight history with 9. Third most finishes in welterweight history with 11. He's a UFC Hall of Famer, the Pioneer Wing. He also has one of the greatest fights of all time, Hughes versus Trigg, where he picked Frank Trigg and ran him into his own corner and slammed him. Shit was wild. I remember watching that as a kid. He had a dominant career. Almost his whole entire career was absolutely dominant. Fought the best guys they put in front of him he could for the time. 45-9 is just insane. He has the title wins. He has the defenses. What holds him back? Lack of high-level wins. I can't put him over against a lot of champions no matter how good his dominance and longevity is, you know, because he kind of doesn't have as many good wins as everyone. Some people would say BJ Penn's not that great of a win. I beg to differ. At the time, BJ Penn was really good. But he's got to win over BJ Penn and GSP. So for me, that's good enough to get him at 14. Matt Hughes, he was a monster. Fucking could take dudes down in an array of different ways, beat them up. Got better at his submission game as time went on. Had a lot of submission wins. One of the first guys to really blend his submission and ground and pound attack together. If he took you down, he could beat you up. He could submit you. So Matt Hughes, 14. Number 13, Max Blessed Holloway. Record 26-7. Notable wins. It's like he's just got a bunch of wins. Jose Aldo 2 times. Charles Oliveira. Justin Gaethje. Yair Rodriguez. Frankie Edgar. Anthony Pettis. Brian Ortega. Ricardo Lamas. Cub Swanson. And Calvin Kattar. If your lowest wins are Cub Swanson and Calvin Kattar, I just don't really think people understand how good those fighters were. Cub Swanson is one of the most underrated fighters of these lower weight classes. And Calvin Kattar is just, he's a top 10 guy in his weight class. Notable losses: Volkanovski 3 times, Dustin Poirier 2 times, and Conor McGregor. Accomplishments: UFC featherweight champion, defended the title 3 times. Third most title fights in UFC featherweight history with 5. UFC BMF champion, current. I don't know how much that matters to people. UFC Fight of the Night 7 times, and then I don't know what I put there. POT of the night. I forgot what that stands for. Performance of the night. 5 times. Longest win streak in UFC featherweight history with 13. Most wins in UFC featherweight history with 20. Most finishes in UFC featherweight history with 11. Elite win resume. Former featherweight champion, UFC longevity and influence. Fucking people love Max. He's a draw. And you just know when Max Holloway comes in there that he has the ability, if he's on, to finish or beat anybody he's across from for the most part. And, even in his losses, they're close fights. I don't know if he's ever been finished. I'd have to go look at that. I probably should have checked to see if he's been finished, but he's one of the most dominant and high level and fun to watch fighters that's ever existed. What holds him back? Alexander Volkanovski, and we'll get to that. Number 12 is Islam Makhachev. So some people would probably think that they shouldn't have Islam that high on his list, but he's been absolutely dominant through his career. 26-1, wins over Volkanovski 2 times, Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, Arman Saryukian, Dan Hooker, Bobby Green, and Drew Dober. 1 loss, Diego Ferreira. A lot of people harp on the loss, but it's MMA. Like anyone can be knocked out, like in theory. Accomplishments: current UFC lightweight champion, 3 title defense streak, and tied first most title wins in UFC light heavyweight history 4 times. Tied most consecutive UFC lightweight title defenses with 3. He's been on a dominant champion run. Potential to be a top 5 or maybe even the GOAT. He's on GOAT watch. Absolute dominant of a fighter. This is my opinion, I think he's more skilled and a better fighter than Khabib. He just does not have he's on the cusp, if he could keep being dominant, to surpass Khabib, in my opinion. One of the best strikers MMA, in my opinion, in terms of his skills. His approach is, in my opinion, a little more rudimentary, but super, super effective. His reaction time's really good. Stays disciplined with his striking, and he's just super effective. He's been beating dudes up on the feet, beating them on the ground. Not as good as a grappler as Khabib, but definitely probably just as good as his ability to actually finish guys. His ability to hold dudes down all the time. Gets a little tired as fights go on. Not as quite as good as a grappler as Khabib. What holds him back is his longevity. Can he maintain his current title run? And personally, I think he does. I think he maintains his title run. I think he's going to crack the top 10 pretty soon. Number 11, Kamaru Usman. So I struggled here for 11 and 10 and how I wanted to put Kamaru and who's at number 10. It basically came down to a factor that I'll talk about in the next slide. But Kamaru Usman, 20-4. Notable wins: Leon Edwards, Tyron Woodley, Rafael Dos Anjos, Kobe Covington ×2, Jorge Masvidal ×2, Sean Strickland, Gilbert Burns, Damian Maia. One of the better resumes in terms of championship fighting. Notable losses: Leon Edwards 2 times and Khamzat Chimaev, which is, later on down the stretch here. Guy's got a lot of miles on him. UFC welterweight champion, 5 times, or UFC welterweight champion with 5 title defenses. 3rd most title wins in UFC welterweight history is 6. Most consecutive wins in the UFC welterweight history with 15 fights in a row. He had a dominant career. Title defenses and win streak, beat multiple champions. What holds him back? really late to the game like some of the other fighters. It's something that, it's possible that their prime and longevity in title defenses would have been a lot more had they not gotten into the game of MMA as late as they did. And you see that with a lot of these high-level wrestler guys that wrestled in college, either tried to be Olympians or be Olympians. Kamaru Usman, one thing I really respect and love about Kamaru Usman is he really developed his striking skills. He went from a guy that couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag on the feet to being a guy that was really, really, really effective. Testament to his hard work and his coaching strategy. Never was a guy that got really fancy, but started to really understand fundamentals, had really good, crisp, straight punches behind a jab. And when you wrestle and you can time takedowns that good and you're that physically imposing, in my opinion, you don't really have to have a really deep tool bag. You just have to be really, really good at the striking skills that are actually conducive to putting dudes in position for you to take them down and beat them up. Really good jab, double pump jab, cross, started to develop some solid leg kicks to score points. Like, he eventually became a really formidable striker and had natural power. So I loved watching the develop of Usman. You knew what you were going to get with the takedowns, and the dude was an absolutely relentless competitor, a little bit of a cornball and shit, but I personally loved watching the fight. He used to beat the fuck out of dudes. Kamaru Usman, number 11. So the reason why number 10, Stipe Miocic, goes over Kamaru Usman is simply down to the fact that Stipe Miocic was just finishing everybody. So Stipe Miocic, 10-4. Notable wins: Daniel Cormier 2 times, Francis Ngannou, Junior Dos Anjos, Alistair Overeem, Fabricio Doom, Mark Hunt, Andre Arlovski, and Roy Nelson. I would say that the actual wins on paper probably a little bit not as strong as Usman's, but I think the ability in which he beat all these fighters and how devastating of a fashion he beat these fighters is what puts him over the edge. If there's one thing I value, obviously I value the notable wins and the longevity, but if you could finish dudes on top of that, that's very important to me. When we get down into this top 15 area, that kind of ends up being what separates dudes a little bit in most instances. Notable losses: he's only lost to Daniel Cormier, Francis Ngannou. He had one random loss to Stefan Struve, which is kind of wild. I thought, if you run it back, you probably beat Stefan Struve 9 times out of 10. Accomplishments: UFC heavyweight champion 2 times, defended the title 4 total times, most consecutive title defenses in UFC heavyweight history, 3 and most combined with 4, tied most wins in UFC heavyweight title fights with 6, Randy Couture. He's got the most finishes in UFC heavyweight title fights with 4, all of them are KOs. Most successful heavyweight champion of all time. And listen, Stipe was knocking motherfuckers dead, bro. Like, Stipe was knocking dudes up on the feet with boxing along the fence, taking dudes down and beating them up. Like, took Alistair Overeem down, who's hard to fucking take down, and just knocked that dude fucking senseless on the floor. Like, I get it. Like, Overeem, he's never been able to take a punch, but hard dude to control on the ground. Like, just a lot of highlight knockouts from Stipe. His fight against Fabricio Verdum, or Verdum's chasing him around and Stipe's just backing up and fucking blasting him with a counter shot. There's just a lot of interesting ways Stipe took dudes out at fights, and he's just been finishing all the fucking great heavyweights. And he's just a great fighter. What holds him back? Not much. There's just greater champions than him. Has a chance to truly shut down the heavyweight GOAT talk with a win over John Jones, if he could beat John Jones. I would say Stipe is the underdog in that fight, but at heavyweight, there's always a puncher's chance. I'd like to see it. So Stipe Miocic, number 10. Number 9, Dominick the Dominator Cruz. So I might catch flack for this one, but I have a pretty well thought out reason for why Dominick Cruz is in my top 10. His record 24-4. Notable wins: T.J. Dillashaw, Demetrius Johnson, Uriah Faber 2 times, Joseph Benavidez, Ian McCall, who was very underrated, one of the best 125ers in the world at one point, Pedro Munoz, Brian Bowles, Cain Muscati, and Scott Jorgensen. Notable losses: Cody Garbrandt, which just fucking chaps my ass. When you think of the arc, the career that Dominick Cruz has had, of all the dudes he loses to lose his title, he loses to Cody Garbrandt, Henry Cejudo, Uriah Faber, Marlon Vera. Accomplishments: UFC Bantamweight champion 2 times with 3 title defenses. Second most title wins in Bantamweight history with 4. Second most takedowns in WC UFC Bantamweight history with 55. WC Bantamweight champion with 2 title defenses. Longevity across 2 organizations. Influential Bantamweight, original innovative fighting style, and lighter weight pioneer. So the reason why he's so high on my list is what holds him back is injured for a big chunk of his prime, 4 years almost. What could have been a big chunk of his career was missed, and he was absolutely dominant, and dudes couldn't figure him out up into the Garbrandt fight, and I really don't know what to make truly to this day of the Garbrandt fight. Cody Garbrandt might have some of the lowest fight IQ, striking IQ. Can't take punches and shit, and I'm not trying to be mean or whatever. It's just the truth. Like, in the history of the UFC, and so I don't know, like, bad stylistic matchup. I mean, he did a good thing. He kind of forced Dominick to have to come to him, which is what Dominick does to everyone else, and managed to get the victory. But I truly believe that if Dominick Cruz would have not have been injured as much as he was, there was no inclinations to me that anyone was really going to figure him out during that 4-year span, beat him, finish him. It might be counterintuitive to some of the other reasons why I've held people back, because he might not have as many high-level wins as some of the other guys, but he has insane longevity and friggin' just cleared his whole division out over almost a decade. And the only thing that holds him back from being higher on the list is, he was injured for a fourth of it. Almost half of it, maybe half his prime. So, Dominick Cruz, number 9. Number 8, Alexander Volkanovski. This might be controversial to some people, but he's 26-4. Notable wins: Jose Aldo, Max Holloway 3 times, Yair Rodriguez, Chad Mendes. All of those are really good wins. Brian Ortega, Chan Sung Jung. Notable losses: he's only lost to Islam twice. I thought he won the first fight, and then he just recently lost to Ilia Topuria. Accomplishments: UFC featherweight champion, 5 times defended, 5 title defenses, second most title fight wins in UFC flyweight history with 6. Second highest win streak in UFC featherweight history with 11. Just a dominant fighter throughout his whole entire career. Even if you go back to when he started in the UFC, early on, not as many notable wins, but just running through a weight class. It's always been a tough weight class, all the way up to when he became champion and was dominant as a champion. Has a high level quality of wins. One thing that people don't talk about is he's arguably the most efficient and effective fighter in the history of combat sports. If you go look at takedown accuracy, striking accuracy, ability to hit and not get hit, the dude is absolutely dominant, and did so against like very high level guys. What holds him back? Very late to the game. He didn't start fighting at a high level until his late 20s. Played like rugby or some shit before that. Could have been a top 5, but was kind of on the receiving end of some losses here in some pivotal fights. Kind of thought he got robbed the first time against Islam, which is nuts, and then obviously got knocked out the second time, and then got knocked out against Ilia Topuria. I mean, he is getting older. Volkanovski's on the wrong side of 30 now. Eventually the athleticism, the ability to take punches, and the drive kind of wanes, but what he's done in a short time, how dominant he's been in a short time on all levels, wins, efficiency, just skill as a fighter. It's just so crazy that the guy has developed into what he has become. Just a monster. Number 8, Alexander the Great Volkanovski. So Khabib Nurmagomedov, I've seen people put Khabib like 3. I've seen people put Khabib not in his top 10. But I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, and he's definitely, in my opinion, the most interesting fighter to analyze in terms of his actual greatness. His record's 29-0. He's never lost a fight with 8 KOs and 11 subs. Guy could finish people. Notable wins: Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor, Rafael dos Anjos. And then after that, I put a couple more guys, but it falls off. I don't think Edson Barboza is truly a great win. I don't think Ali Quinta's a great win. Michael Johnson, they're okay wins. And I also watched him lose one time. Can't hold it against it because it's not a loss on his record. Go watch it. You can find it on YouTube. Gleason Tebow versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. Tebow out-grappled him and outstruck him. Somehow, Khabib got the nod. It's neither here nor there. I just wanted to put that out there. Accomplishments: UFC lightweight champion, 3 times defended. Tied first with 3 UFC lightweight title defenses, along with a handful of other dudes. Tied first with 4 title wins, along with other guys at 155. UFC Hall of Fame Modern Wing 2022. Dominant title run, undefeated, dominant fighting style. The reason why he's number 7 for me is, if you look ahead to what holds him back, it's longevity as champion. It's impressive that he went 29-8. But there's guys that have gone on longer win streaks for extended periods of time and cleared out divisions against way better fighters. I know the Russian and the Dagestan guys and all these dudes from these like Eastern Bloc countries and Russian shit, they're all monsters and they can grapple and stuff, but 80% of the dudes that are on his win list, no one knows these guys. Unless you're from those areas of the world or you're watching all those sub-organizations that he fought in, almost none of those dudes are here dominating the UFC. And there's champions and even non-champions that have overall better win resumes. Did they do what they did in their prime as dominantly as Khabib? Absolutely not. You guys won't like this, but like I said, not many high-level wins compared to other champions, like I said. And then legacy, brother, legacy. He quit in his prime. Part of the reason why he is in the top 10 for me is because I know what that guy could have done. Islam Makhachev's going to pass him in greatness, and Khabib's not going to go down as the greatest fighter of all time because he retired in his prime. I heard he made a lot of fucking money in his handful of like high-level fights in the UFC. Good for him. Retire right off in the sunset, but you can't talk about, in my opinion, if we're really trying to talk about who the GOAT is, you can't talk about legacy, brother, legacy, and all this other stuff when you really didn't beat a lot of really high-level guys. And you were so dominant on the high-level guys you did beat, you could have really cemented your legacy at the greatest. I firmly believe Khabib could have gone up to welterweight and ragdolled the fuck and beat up the fuck out of everyone up at welterweight and could have been a 2-division champ. And I think he could have defended both of those titles, but he just never did it. There was guys that wanted to do that. Granted, he has almost 30 fights and he'd been fighting for a while. He had other interests. But, you know, I don't want to say I hold it against you, but I guess I kind of have to because, you know, you stopped fighting right when you were on the cusp of taking off to be a possible the GOAT. So that's why Khabib's at number 7 for me. Couldn't be a top 5 guy for me. Still a top 10 guy because I know what he can do to guys and what he did do to the top tier guys. Like dominated Dustin Poirier, dominated Justin Gaethje, Conor, Rafael Dos Anjos, just a fucking animal. Khabib Nurmagomedov at 7. Number 6, Anderson the Spider Silva. So on the flip side, a lot of people will be like, oh, well, you know, at times I hold who you beat against people, but like I said, there's something to be said for longevity and finishing people, and I think that's what puts Anderson at number 6 for me. 34-11, notable wins. Chael Sonnen twice, Rich Franklin twice, Vitor Belfort, Yushin Okami, Damian Maia, Forrest Griffin, and Nate Marquardt. Notable losses, Chris Weidman 2 times, which... let's be real here. I don't know what was going on with Anderson Silva at the time, dicking around, messing around. The first time he lost to Chris Weidman was his own fault, and the second time he broke his leg. Does anyone not think that if Anderson Silva showed up ready to go and was serious about it and wanted to kill Chris Weidman, he couldn't have knocked him out? Chris Weidman wasn't even trying to grapple in those fights. So I think he kind of screwed the pooch on that one. Accomplishments, UFC middleweight champion with 10 consecutive title defenses, most in middleweight history. Second longest streak in UFC history. Most finishes in UFC title fights with 9. Most KOs in UFC title fights with 7. Most KO of the night awards with 7. Most knockdowns in UFC title fights with 10. Most UFC middleweight title fights with 13. UFC Hall of Famer, the Pioneer Wing. Title dominance, title defense streak, all-time great finisher and longevity. Yeah, I agree. He doesn't have as many marquee wins as some of the other champions. But, you know, some could make the argument no one dominated the way Anderson Silva dominated. He was either submitting or knocking everyone the fuck out, like in highlight fashion. and he was a draw. You wanted to see what Anderson Silva was going to do to dudes. It was like the Mike Tyson effect. What holds him back, although he was dominant, many other champions just have higher quality wins, and the guys ahead of him just have, higher quality wins, But Anderson, make no mistake, Anderson Silva is one of the greatest fighters of all time, and he's one of the best fighters that's ever fought. So, I'm not going to disrespect people. I know a lot of people that write Anderson Silva out of the top 10 because he just doesn't have the win, but he was also super fucking dominant. Number 5, this could possibly be the most controversial of all my picks on this list because a lot of people don't have Daniel Cormier near their top 5. Some people don't have him in their top 10. Personally, Daniel Cormier, to me, is my 5th greatest fighter of all time. 22-3, could finish dudes. He has 10 KOs, 5 submissions. Beat Stipe Miocic, Alexander Gustafsson, Anthony Rumble Johnson twice, Anderson Silva, Dan Henderson, Frank Mir, Josh Barnett, Derek Lewis, Roy Nelson, Bill Fitzsilva, Jeff Monson, and Volkanovski. Notable losses. He's only lost to John Jones and Stipe twice. Only lost to two of the greatest fighters of all time. Accomplishments, and he also beat one of them. UFC light heavyweight champion, 3 times defended. UFC heavyweight champion, 1 time defended. Former Strikeforce heavyweight Grand Prix champion on short notice. A lot of people that aren't wicked deep in MMA just don't understand how good Daniel Cormier was immediately when he first burst on the MMA scene. The dude was already one of the best fighters in the world from the second he stepped into the professional limelight. Showed up, Strikeforce heavyweight Grand Prix, wasn't even going to compete as an alternate, showed up, basically no camp, and just ran through some of the best heavyweights in the world at the time. 5th multi-divisional champion, UFC Hall of Famer in the modern ring, dominant his whole entire career with elite wins, elite in 2 weight classes from the time he was an elite heavyweight before he got to the UFC, and then was elite heavyweight and elite light heavyweight when he got there, and he was a double champion. First fighter to defend 2 different titles, and he's also overall in terms of his greatness, he's one of the best ambassadors we've ever had for the sport. Very knowledgeable, does a great job commentating and interviewing fighters, and a lot of fighters and fans love the guy. He's gonna stick around and do a lot of great things for the sport. First rate fighter, first rate ambassador of the sport, first rate man, Daniel fucking Cormier. He's my number 5. What holds him back? Super late to the game. I want to say his first meaningful fight, he was like 29 or some shit. You got to remember, he's in his 40s now. And then John Jones. If it wasn't for John Jones being as great as John Jones is, Daniel Cormier's career probably would have been a lot greater. He would have probably gotten a few more title defenses under his belt. Just Daniel Cormier's is just elite, top shelf tier fighter. Daniel Cormier, number 5. So number 4, Jose Aldo. A lot of people drop Jose on his list because he's lost to a few of the fighters on this list. In more recent times, but you just can't argue with the overall dominance and pedigree and skill set of Jose Aldo, probably throughout his whole entire career. 30 wins, 8 losses. Notable wins over Frankie Edgar, Chad Mendes twice, Uriah Faber, Mike Brown, Cub Swanson, Chan Sung Jung, Pedro, that's a Korean zombie for people out there who don't know, Pedro Munoz, Ricardo Lamas, Kenny Florian, Jeremy Stevens. Really good list of wins. Like the WEC days, he fought all the best featherweights, and then comes to the UFC and just runs through all the best featherweights. Notable losses, the 1-punch knockout to Conor McGregor, 2 losses to Holloway and a loss to Volkanovski. Can't really be mad at those losses. Those are your high-level losses, accomplishments. WC featherweight champion with 2 title defenses. I don't even think he ever lost a fight in the WEC. Like, Aldo back in the WEC was like, this whisper in the wind when you when you started to get really deep in MMA, started watching other promotions and stuff. I had a buddy who was like, bro, you got to check out this dude. Fucking Jose Aldo Jr., this young Brazilian cat at the WEC. So I watch, he's out here just fucking starching dudes with fucking flying knees, just fucking flat all over the cage, great counter striking, could fight forward, could fight, in the counter, great leg kicks, just insane takedown defense. He's just a beast. UFC featherweight champion, inaugural champion. He was so good, they were just like, here, you can have the belt. Defended it 7 times. Most title fights in UFC featherweight history. 11, UFC Hall of Famer in the modern wing. Dominance and insane longevity. His title reign, and he's an all-time great finisher, and he's still winning fights. Like right now, like he doesn't have a title, but he just won like 3 fights in a row in his mid-30s. Like, still a high-level fighter. You could make the argument he's the greatest finisher of all time. Hands down, one of the scariest fighters of all time in his prime. Like, his ability to read what his opponents were going to do in the striking game and just react and make his decisions and commit to those decisions and just fucking starching, bro. Starching dudes. And no one could take him down. Just insane hips, great timing on stuffing takedowns, and would just stuff dudes and just fucking whoop them, bro. Flash knockouts. He's laid some of the worst beatings I've ever seen down on guys. Like, later on in his career, his comeback fight against Jeremy Stevens, when he hit him with that fucking body shot and fucking just shut Jeremy Stevens down while he was facing adversity in that fight. Just so many all-time great moments and dominance from Jose Aldo throughout his whole entire career. The King of Rio, number 4, Jose Aldo Jr. Number 3, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. So we get to the final 3 here. There's a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. I mean, I'm not going to get mad at you if you think Demetrius Johnson is, the greatest fighter of all time. A lot of people just don't understand how skilled these flyweights were. And I think a part of the reason why a lot of people kind of trash on Demetrius Johnson is because a lot of people kind of like to see the bigger fighters fight. They like to see damage and people get knocked out and stuff. You got to respect the skill set at these lower weight classes. Mighty Mouse is 25-4. Notable wins over Henry Cejudo, Joseph Benavidez 2 times, Ian McCall, Ray Borg, Adriano Moraes, John Dodson, John Moraga, Miguel Angel Torres, and there was a handful of other guys that could have been on here. He's just so dominant. Notable losses: Henry Cejudo, Dominick Cruz, and Adriano Moraes. Accomplishments: UFC featherweight champion, inaugural. Yet another guy that was so good when he got to the UFC. It said he was inaugural, but for some reason, but I don't think he was actually inaugural, so I messed that up. It said somewhere that he was the inaugural champion, but I don't think he was. I'm pretty sure there was a 4-way fight, like a mini tournament, to figure out who was the champion. It was like him, Ian McCall, Yosuke Formiga, and some other gentleman who I always forget his name, a Japanese guy. They were supposedly going to fight, but there was like they all started fighting. There's a little controversy because there was like a draw and a split between some of them and stuff. So I don't know if like after the fact the UFC just made him the champion or if he had to actually win the champion. I'll go back, fact check that for you guys, but I read somewhere he was like the inaugural champ. Granted, I've watched so much stuff, it's hard to keep track of everything, but he has 11 title defenses. Those were consecutive, which is a UFC record. Most flyweight title wins with 12, third most in UFC title defenses. Most subs in UFC title fights with 5, tied most finishes in UFC title weight fights with 7 next to John Jones. Most consecutive wins in UFC flyweight history with 13. For Mighty Mouse, longevity, title reign, underrated fighters. Longevity, title reign, underrated fighters he beat in a massive win streak. Elite MMA skill set. His skill set is as elite as it comes. It just doesn't translate into like, crazy friggin' powerful knockouts, but he finished a lot of dudes. 5 KOs and 8 submissions. He had a couple really good knockouts in his career that were just surprising. People didn't expect him to come. Like, he had a really good knockout against Joseph Benavidez and just fucking starched him. The only thing that holds him back is, the 2 guys ahead of him, which I think people can guess at this point. I didn't actually write down what holds him back, but, this top 3 here, I wouldn't be mad at you if you put Demetrius Johnson number 1 on your list. There's just really no downsides, really. I guess if you tried to make a downside, the UFC tried to murder the flyweight division and tried to say he wasn't marketable, which if the numbers say that, cool, whatever. But, I get a little bit annoyed with that because it should be about how good the fighter really is. And, modern society now, we don't really care too much for a dude that does most of his expression with his actual fighting, and he's just like kind of like a family man that like streams video games and shit. He's not out here getting in trouble and doing stupid shit and like in the headlines all the time. just a quiet, humble guy that wants to go out there and fuck people up, which should be the most important thing at the end of the day. Demetrius Johnson, number 3. Number 2, George Rush St. Pierre. Again, wherever you guys would put him, that's on you, but I'll tell you my reasons as to why he's not number 1. I actually tinkered with it for the longest time, and I struggled to not have him as my number 1 guy. Record 26-2. A laundry list of guys he's beaten: Matt Hughes 2 times, BJ Penn 2 times, Michael Bisping, Johnny Hendricks, Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, John Fitch, Jake Shields, Josh Koscheck 2 times, Dan Hardy, Thiago Alves, Matt Serra, and Carl Parisian. For a lot of people don't know how good Carl Parisian was at one point, watch some more MMA. I'm actually going to make a video later. Underrated fighters of all time will probably be on that list. Notable losses: Matt Hughes and Matt Serra. His only 2 losses. Matt Serra was a flash knockout. A little bit of a blemish on his career, in my opinion. I don't think Matt Hughes is a bad loss. He got submitted via an armbar, but the Matt Serra one is one of the things that puts George in second place. Accomplishments: UFC welterweight champion 2 times with 9 consecutive title defenses, most in UFC welterweight history. UFC middleweight champion 1 time, most wins in UFC welterweight history title fights with 12. Most UFC welterweight title fights with 14. Second most wins in UFC title fights with 13. Tied 4th in UFC consecutive win streak with 13. UFC Hall of Famer of the modern era. Elite skill set, dominant champion, 2 divisional champion, longevity, beating 2 generations of welterweights. George was a fucking absolute beast and could possibly go down as the ultimate tactician in MMA. I remember when I was younger, when George burst on the scene and started to become the dominant force that he was, I used to do this immature thing where I fucking hated George so much because he just beat the shit out of all the fighters that I loved. In every single fight, George would have a fight, and the next guy he fought, I loved Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, fucking Dan Hardy, Thiago Alves. These were some of my favorite fighters. And just every time I'd be like, yo, Dan Hardy's going to get him, Thiago Alves, because I just wanted them to pull it out. But what made George so great and so effective was he truly understood and did his homework on his opponents and figured out how to beat guys and wasn't scared to attack their weaknesses. His wrestling that he developed was so good, his ability to time double legs on guys, physically imposing. Just his timing off, setting up his own strikes and countering off other guys' strikes to chain takedowns and shoot those double legs on guys. It's just absolutely spectacular for a dude who developed his striking as he moved along in the game. And if he could outstrike you, he was an underrated striker. He would beat you up on the feet, jabs, really good cross, really underrated kicking ability, leg kick, turn, side kick. He had a lot of tools at his disposal, but he just used them in a very balanced way, very efficient way. And if he thought he would struggle with you on your feet, or if he ever got in hairy moments, he just had the option to take you down and beat you up. In my opinion, one of the most efficient ground and pounders of all time. Just really good at controlling guys and posturing up and landing just devastating elbows on guys. You just bust dudes up. And a lot of times people think that George is just this timid, I'm not the best by your performance and all that stuff. Just this wicked, nice, humble guy. That dude was a motherfucker in the cage. Just laid some serious fucking ass whooping downs on dudes. A lot of people ding him for having a lot of decisions where he laid on guys and just beat them up and stuff like that. But it's part of the fight game. Get good at not taking down and getting beaten up, nerds. What holds him back? We're parsing hairs with what holds him back from being number 1. But based off what I said in the very beginning of the video, I'm not going to get into all the extracurricular stuff. He has a bad loss. And he has been finished, something the guy at the number 1 spot has not. And the number 1 guy is John Bones Jones, 27-1. Notable wins: Daniel Cormier 2 times, Alexander Gustafsson 2 times, Glover Teixeira, Chael Sonnen, Shogun Rua, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, Rampage Jackson, Vitor Belfort, Ryan Bader, and Cyril Gahn. In my opinion, that list is the greatest list of human beings anyone's beaten, and the manner in which he beat those guys is absolutely impressive. UFC light heavyweight champion, 11 consecutive title defenses. UFC heavyweight champion, current. 4th most consecutive title defenses with 8 in his first reign at light heavyweight. Most most title defenses in light heavyweight history with 11. Ties Mighty Mouse for title defenses all time. Most wins in UFC title fights with 15. And so I messed that up there. I don't know why I wrote that like that. UFC light heavyweight champion, 11 consecutive title defenses. I think I just meant to write 11 defenses. He had 8 consecutive in his first reign as the champion. If you remember, he got his belt pulled away from him and then he got it back. Most wins in UFC title fights with 15. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to the fact that he has one of the all-time elite skill sets along with his physical tools. Tall, so long, and knew how to use that length. I was listening to Rashad Evans the other day on Rampage's podcast, talking about when he fought John Jones. And now, granted, Rashad Evans is not a big guy, even at light heavyweight. If you remember, Rashad used to fight at heavyweight and then went down and won the light heavyweight title. When he fought John for the title, he talks about how he's like, you think he's long and tall and big. He's like, and he comes at you and you could tell. He's like, and then he reaches out to try to grab you. And you're just like, holy shit. Like, this dude's so huge, so long, so strong. Like, the way he was talking about it, it's like, good fucking luck with that. He has the longevity, the dominance, beat 2 generations of high-level light heavyweights, beat a top 10 great 2 times in Daniel Cormier, and he's a finisher. He's finished a lot of his fights, whether it's TKO or submission, and he's never been finished. I mean, a lot of people talked about how he has a blemish on his record losing to Matt Hamill, but that's over, like, I'm not going to get too much into that, but it's over some dumb rules. Got disqualified. It's whatever, but John Jones is hands down the greatest and the most dominant fighter to ever fight. Yeah, I just want to know what your guys' thoughts are. This is my top 30 greatest fighters of all time. Could there be some people that surpass like Mighty Mouse, GSP Jones? I mean, you never know. I mean, if we look at other sports, you got guys, that have crazy records in other sports. Like, for example, a guy like Jerry Rice, his statistics will probably never be beat again. Yeah, like some of Wayne Gretzky's, like, in terms of goals scored and stuff like that. Who knows? Maybe Mighty Mouse and George and John will stand the test of time in their positions, in the all-time list, respectively. There are a handful of guys right now that are knocking on the door, having the possibility of making a serious run towards their spots. Just remember that John Jones is not done fighting, supposedly. He's going to fight Stipe, which will bolster his record if he wins. Does he defend the heavyweight title after that? I don't know. But John has the ability here for the next couple of years to really, truly cement without a doubt in anyone's mind that he's the GOAT. If he could defend the heavyweight title a handful of times, which a lot of people get these 2 title belts, they don't really defend them. He has an opportunity here to defend both of them. I'd like to see him win a couple times at heavyweight, defend that title a handful of times, so we'll see. Yeah, so that's my list. Let me know what you guys think. I'm actually working on a video right now, which is going to be like my most underrated fighters of all time. I got my NFL power rankings that are going to be coming out here soon. It's almost football season. I'm excited for that. Football, fantasy, all that happy crap. Let me know in the comments. What do you guys think about my list? I know there's some interesting parts to my list. There's a couple spots where I had a hard time wanting to put dudes in certain spots, but this is just the way I look at things and being honest about some things that are, important in the way things have gone in the MMA sphere. I wish I had more time to really get into it and break it down, but I had to go through so many fighters, so I had to try my hardest to keep it short. I'm hoping to do a podcast in the future with some guys about fighting so we could talk more about what made a lot of these guys truly great. And expand on their skill sets and moments and stuff. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys. I hope everyone has a great day. I hope you guys drop some feedback for me. It felt good to get back on here and make a video. I worked on this for a little bit, and hopefully I could get a little more consistent, put a little more stuff on here. I've been busy with work, but I've been making some content. About to drop some more stuff, so I'll holla at you guys later.